All right, what's going on, everybody? I am here today to talk about if the second destruction of the world, according to the Bible, has already occurred. So, I have a bunch of tabs here. I'm going to go through some stuff and I'm going to provide some evidence that supports my position on this. Now, it doesn't make it the complete truth, and everybody has to do their own research for themselves, but this is what God and Jesus Christ have been leading me to research and understand. So, I'm here today to just provide some of that. So, we're going to start here in Matthew 1:22 to 24. He says, "Now all this was done, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. Then Joseph, being raised from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord bidden him, and took unto him his wife." Okay, so I bring that up because we have Emanuel Swedenborg. So Emmanuel means God is with us, and Emanuel Swedenborg is a very interesting guy. Very, very interesting. So he's Swedish. He was born in 1688 and he died in 1772. He was a Christian theologian, scientist, philosopher, and mystic. He became best known for his book on the afterlife, Heaven and Hell, in 1758. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I am going to read this portion right in here. Swedenborg had a prolific career as an investor and scientist. In 1741, at 53, he entered into a spiritual phase in which he began to experience dreams and visions, notably on Easter weekend on the 6th of April, 1744. His experiences culminated in a spiritual awakening in which he received a revelation that Jesus Christ had appointed him to write the heavenly doctrine to reform Christianity. According to the heavenly doctrine, the Lord had opened Swedenborg's spiritual eyes so that from then on he could freely visit heaven and hell to converse with angels, demons, and other spirits, and the last judgment had already occurred the year before the 1758 publication of De Nova Hierosolima. I don't know all that. In English, it says concerning the New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine in 1757. So, Emanuel Swedenborg, very interesting guy. Uh, Over the last 28 years of his life, he wrote 18 published theological works and several more that remained unpublished. He termed himself a servant of Lord Jesus Christ in true Christian religion, which he published himself. Some followers of the heavenly doctrine believe that of his theological works, only those that were published by Swedenborg himself are fully divinely inspired. Others have regarded all Swedenborg's theological works as equally inspired, saying, for example, that the fact that some works were not written out in a final edited form for publication does not make a single statement less trustworthy than the statements in any of the other works. The new church, also known as Swedenborgianism, is a new religious movement originally founded in 1787 and comprising several historically related Christian denominations that revere Swedenborg's writings as revelation. So, I say all that because he's a super interesting guy who said that the second coming of Christ, so Jesus appeared before him at the foot of his bed when he awoke on Easter morning in 1744. And he was then so psychic that he was given special, let's say it's probably on here, he was given special dispensation to be go on the parliament for Sweden, and he was given the honorary name Swedenborg because his real last name was Swedesburg. Look, you see his dad here, his name's Swedesburg. He was given Swedenborg because he was put on parliament and of Sweden. So then they just changed it to that because he was so psychic that he would uh, say different things that only people and their dead relatives would know. Yeah, prophetic accounts. like, fire anecdotes. I mean, you guys can look into this yourself, but that's why I wanted to start with this. Start with Matthew. Emmanuel. They shall call his name Emmanuel, which okay, that does mean God is with us. But also, this guy's named Emmanuel, and then Jesus Christ comes to him, and he was a scientist who wasn't into spirituality at all, and then he became spiritual all of a sudden on Easter. That's very symbolic, and he has a prophetic uh, fire anecdote, which leads us into the next one. Not that one has anything to do with the other. So I want to go back to the Bible in Revelation 21 to 15. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who was the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. And I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. So I have that because we are at the end here. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. That we are the rest of the dead that did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. The Christ millennial kingdom is 1,000 years long, as a millennium is 1,000 years long, and we happen to be missing 1,000 years of history. Apparently, there's just the way it's all put together, it's either 1,000 years are missing or 1,000 years are just completely made up. So, whichever you prefer to believe, or if you just believe that this is just 2,000 years later, that we're to 2021, well, that would mean that there's been no biblical prophecy fulfilled in 2,000 years. And we know that the biblical prophecy happens much faster than 2,000 years. So the controllers of this realm would like you to believe that nothing has occurred, but actually, lots of things have occurred. All right, so I believe that the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended, are us. We are getting our second chance, where our redemption, our chance to be redeemed by coming back to Christ. So I think time started because when they threw that ancient serpent in the pit, was when Jesus became the angel of the Lord, who bound him and threw the devil and Satan and bound him for 1,000 years and threw him into the pit. That's why they started keeping track of time for the millennial kingdom. Now, it wasn't perfect the entire time, but it was humanity without the influence of Satan on the earth. He took that away, and then what happened was different places were in very peace and loving for 1,000 years, and that there were others that were doing the crusades and warring and conquering. uh, but that was all in the name of Christ. Not that I'm saying that's good. They were conquering who knows what. Apparently, some biblical scholars believe they were conquering the giants and these beings that were created, these abominations that were created that weren't human. They were either from the reptile lineage, from the serpent lineage, or they were from the Nephilim lineage, that they were somehow an abomination. And, that's possible. All right. So here's the last judgment. Is the last judgment, final judgment, day of reckoning, day of judgment, judgment day, doomsday, or the day of the Lord? It's part of the Abrahamic religions. And some Christian and Islamic denominations consider the second coming of Christ to be the final and infinite judgment by God of the people of every nation, resulting in the approval of some and the penalizing of others. The concept is found in all the canonical Gospels, particularly the Gospel of Matthew, as well as in the Susirat Az Zukarif in the Quran. According to some interpretations, Christian futurists believe it will take place after the resurrection of the dead and the second coming of Christ, while full preterists believe it has already occurred. The Last Judgment has inspired numerous artistic depictions. So, it will take place after the resurrection of the dead, which is us. We're the resurrection of the dead. Remember, we just went over that right here. The rest of the dead resurrected after this 1,000 years. So the last judgment is coming next. Okay. So what I'm going to show is that it has something has started occurring that maybe it was the end of the millennial kingdom. Uh, this has happened to. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I know the Bible, and I couldn't find where it is. But I know biblical scholars talk about the first destruction of the world would be through water, which is a flood, and the second destruction of the world would be by fire. So not only fire, but we have famines, right? The end times prophecy said there's going to be lots and lots of famines. So we're going to start, right into the 1740s, 1750s. This is when Emanuel Swedenborg started being contacted by Jesus Christ. Remember, it was, when was it? Let's see. I just want to make sure that I'm correct when I'm saying some things here. So 1744. Okay, so, and then he died in 1772, but he said that the resurrection or the second coming was beginning in 1757. So I guess we can start like right around here. Okay, so we'll even skip out on this Irish famine that happened just prior to that. So I mean, I'm not going to go through all these, but we're going to look at the numbers right here. Look at the numbers, how large they get. 10 million people right in this time period, and he died in 72. And there's even more things that happened that I'm not going to pull up here that happened in 73. The Jesuits were exiled and different things like that. So we had, 10 million, then 100,000 plus. Some of these aren't kept track of very well. This one up to 920,000 people. I mean, between 20,000 and 920,000, that's a huge gap, but that's a very high number. And maybe Wikipedia is BS. I'm not saying that Wikipedia is the end all be all, but I use Wikipedia for much of this because this is where it's listed out best to do something like this. But you guys are all free to go look all of this up for yourself and do your own research into this. Don't just take my word for it. So, or Wikipedia's. So we have India with 11 million people in 83, 84, then another 11 million people in India a few years later, 400 to 550,000 in Ukraine, 45 million in China between four different famines. Uh, okay, and in Ukraine it was a series of 14 famines between 1804 to 1872 and then one in 1913. So that's a huge span right there. So this is what I'm talking about. It started in the late 1700s and the 1800s, it really ramped up. Then you got 20,000 Spain and Madrid, 1811, 1812. Remember, those 2 years are going to come in again and again. It's very interesting what happened around that time. Then we have 10,000 Indonesia. I mean, just look at these 800,000 in India. You have the year without a summer called 65,000, but it's probably even way more than that. They just tell us 65,000. A million plus in Ireland for the Great Famine. 83,000 in Indonesia, 60 million in China. And this wasn't part of the other 45 million in China. So from 1850 to 1873. 2 million in India, 1 million in India, 150,000 plus in Finland, 1.5 million in Rajputana. I don't know how to say that. 200 to 300,000 in Iran. I mean, these are some major numbers here. 15 million to 19 million in northern China, India, and Brazil. I mean, from 76 to 79. That is huge. I mean, that's a lot of people dying from famine all of a sudden. A million people from 88 to 92 in Ethiopia. I mean, it just goes on and on, these different famines, but then it starts to clear up and it's not as bad. You do still have some big ones in there, but it's not as often. And there's not as many different places. I mean, the numbers just don't compare to those China numbers. I mean, that's just crazy. So then, all right, famine is one of the things, right? There's always been famine throughout history, right? But it seemed to be particularly bad in the mid to late 1800s. I mean, just all these, it's just crazy. So we also have plagues. So let's do this, a series of plagues, 1350 at the Black Death. That's out of the time range, but we're just going through the years now to see how it ramps up as we go on. 1492, the Columbian Exchange. All right, 1665. So this starts getting a lot closer, and this starts getting into a time period where I think things started occurring. Maybe people weren't aware of it yet, but the 1500s is when things really started going south. And we had the Great Plague of London in 1665. Then we get to 1817, the first cholera pandemic. All right, so the first of 7 cholera pandemics over the next 150 years. All right, so we have 1855, the third plague pandemic, the third bubonic plague, 15 million victims. 1875, the Fiji measles pandemic. Then look at how much it starts ramping up as we get closer to today. 1889, the Russian flu. 1918, Spanish flu. 1957, Asian flu. 81, HIV/AIDS. 2003, SARS. 2009, it didn't even have on there the swine flu. 2019, COVID-19. Uh, you know, it's just crazy. Didn't even pull up the list of all the different pandemics, but you guys can pull up a list of all the different pandemics that were happening. I mean, it's a lot. So now we're at the wars. All right, so we're going to start with the wars because again we have famine, you have pandemics, and you have wars going on all at the same time, wars and rumors of war. So French and Indian War, part of the 7 Years' War, Guarini War, 7 Years' War. I mean, I'm not going to read all these. We're just going to try to scroll through them all, see how long it takes us. So here is the 1700s into the 1800s, this list. The American Revolutionary War, it's a big one. And look how far down the list it is. We start at 1755. You know, that's a that's a lot. That's a lot of wars. I mean, it keeps going. And I mean, these aren't all huge wars, but there are a lot of different wars going on. A lot of countries start signing their, I don't want to say Declaration of Independence, but they started creating constitutions in the late 1700s and into the 1800s. Similar constitutions at that. I mean, you have a ton of different wars happening. Was it Rugby School Rebellion? I don't know. They have that on here. Maybe it was some kind of war. Peasants' War. All right, so that's the 1700s. Now we're going to go to the 1800s. And let me tell you, the 1800s is so much. So I should have had it at the top already. 1800 to 1810 has its own little section because there's so many. First Barbary War. Does that sound like Tartary? First Barbary War between the U.S. and Sweden until 1802, defeated Barbary states and the Ottoman Empire which the Ottoman Empire was one of those empires that lasted 1,000 years, and they used the crescent moon. Interesting, because I don't think religion existed in the same way. I mean, if you look at this, this looks like a sun, or I'm sorry, it looks like the moon possibly, but we know it can't be the moon because the moon and the sun are the same size, and even though they're 400 times apart and they're 400 times the size, it just works out that it lines up perfectly, which probably isn't true. So to me, I believe that our sun is probably the smaller one now, and that the larger one, right, in this sign is actually the sun that was destroyed. That was the quote unquote comet that killed off the dinosaurs. I believe this all started happening in the 1800s. That this sun was, so what the Bible tells us, there was two lights, and we think it's the sun and the moon, but I don't think the moon's real. I think the moon is a projection, and that there is some object there that it's being covered up by some kind of projection using satellites and lasers and all that type of stuff. But to me, there were two suns. Antarctica was called Tierra del Fuego until the 1500s. It was so hot that humans couldn't go there, and there was a bunch of giants and just a whole bunch of different stuff. And I believe that our sun is the lesser light that's talked about in the Bible. So I don't believe that there was a moon way back when. But who knows? So anyway, interesting right off the bat. Then you have, I mean, you have all these revolutionary wars going on too, rebellions, Napoleonic wars. So just crazy. Russia, I mean, France is at war with the entire world at the same time. I mean, just everybody. They're at war with they're just conquering everybody. So all these countries are with them because uh, they were all under Napoleon. He was commanding everyone, and they were all small people, right? They were very small people. Even the Ottoman Empire joined in because they were conquered, you know? And we're not even told that the United States and Sweden had a 4-year war in school. You know, we don't learn about the first Barbary War, the Triple Tripolitan War. I don't even know how to say this. The first of two of them. North African states, say, taking out the Moorish people who used the symbol, who were in America before it was taken over in 1776. You know, that's on the last page. I didn't even stop and talk about that, but that's what they were taking out, the Moorish people that were here in the Americas in the 1770s. So, yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. We're not told it's a world war, but look at this, 1803 to 1815. Who's involved? The entire world is involved in this war. Okay? We're not told that. And a lot of people, this is why they look over this as being the time period of the second destruction of the world, as I'm talking about today. It, I mean, in 1803 to 1806, you had War of the Third Coalition. That's a lot of countries involved, you know, and that's separate, but going on at the same time as some of these wars. So, you know, there's so much war going on. Look at all this. 1804. These are huge wars that are happening all over the place, separate from that one huge one I already talked about. Here's another one, the Fourth Coalition Wars. Well, this one's part of it. All right. So there's a lot of stuff happening that we're not told about in this way. Now, when you start to put the pieces together, you can start to understand why this could very well be something that was the second end of the world. Because up until this point, there wasn't war like this. There was wars, but not to this magnitude. I mean, here we're still 1811, 1812. We're still here. Venezuelan War of Independence. Peruvian War of Independence. Aponte conspiracy. French invasion of Russia, 1812. This was the downfall. And look, this is where the term slaves comes from, the Slavic people. Well, maybe this is slaves, but yeah, the Slavic people, that's where the term slave comes from. So maybe I just said that wrong. My bad. But here, look at all the losers over here, the Russian Empire. But the Russian Empire was located in St. Petersburg, and the French crossed the Alps and ended up in Moscow, and they lost what 400,000 soldiers, over 400,000 soldiers. They were able to get there in that amount of time, but got wiped out in a place that the Russian people weren't even at because the Muscovites occupied that area at that time, Moscow. Their capital would have been St. Petersburg. And then he had, look, France lost another one. Kingdom of Italy, Napoleonic. You guys got to start looking at all this. It's crazy. Part of the War of 1812. The United States lost. We were fighting, I guess, alongside some of these Indian tribes. I said Indians, Native American tribes. I'm even Native American, but there was also Native American tribes on the other side. I'm only a little bit Native American, tiny amount. There's so much here. Second Barbary War. Finishing them off. 100 Days War. I mean, you guys can go through this Caucasian War. Look how many it was, and we're only to 1819. There is not this many wars any other time period in our history. Greek War of Independence. Now that's what I'm saying. All these are starting to have independence. The uprising, Wallachian uprising, Texas Indian Wars, Spanish American Wars of Independence, Ecuadorian War of Independence. You know, what was happening? Cambodian Rebellion, Revolution of 1820. What was happening in the world that everybody started revolting at the same time? First Greek Civil War, Second Greek Civil War. There's so many wars, just all of these. All right, so I mean, I can keep going. It's the whole 1800s are pulled up. I mean, we can probably be at this for a while. I'm not even stopping to read them now. I'm just trying to skim through it. Look at this California Indian Wars. That's part of the Civil War. 61 to 65 was the American Civil War, which we didn't even get to yet. The Crimean War, which is kind of being replayed out now. Not all these different places, but there is a war happening for Crimea at this time. And now you have the United States starting to fight a bunch of wars in a row here in the 1850s, right? Kurdish Revolt of 1855. Filibuster war, just to fill some time, because we need to filibuster a little bit. I didn't even know filibusters. Someone who engages in an unauthorized military expedition into a foreign country or territory to foster or support a political revolution or secession. The term is usually applied to United States citizens who incited insurrections. All right, I'm not even going to get into all that, but that's interesting. All right, so I mean, you saw all the wars. Now, earthquakes. So there's that year again, 1811, 1812. So this sequence of 3 very large earthquakes is usually referred to as the New Madrid earthquakes. after the Missouri town that was the largest settlement on the Mississippi River between St. Louis, Missouri and Natchez, Mississippi. On the basis of the large area of damage, 600,000 square kilometers, the widespread area of perceptibility, 5 million square kilometers, and the complex physiographic changes that occurred, the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 1812 rank as some of the largest in the United States since its settlement by Europeans. They were by far the largest east of the Rocky Mountains in the US and Canada. The area of strong shaking associated with these shocks is 2 to 3 times as large as that of the 1964 Alaska earthquake and 10 times as large as that of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Because there were no seismographs in North America at that time and very few people in the New Madrid region, the estimated magnitudes of the series of earthquakes vary considerably and depend on modern researchers' interpretations of journals, newspaper reports, and other accounts of the ground shaking and damage. The magnitudes of the three principal earthquakes of 1811 to 1812 described below are the preferred values taken from research involved with the producing the 2014 USGS National Seismic Hazard Map. So, they said the first one, magnitude 7.5 on December 16th, 1811. The second one, 7.3, happened January 23rd, 1812. And the third, 7.5 on February 7th, 18.12, or 1812, not 18.12. Uh, the three events believed to range between 6.0 and 6.5 in the Arkansas, Missouri area. And they also had some aftershocks that led them to have 10 of these were greater than 6.0, about 100 were between 5.0 and 5.9, and 89 were in the magnitude 4 range. So, very interesting, right? A lot of interesting stuff happening at that time. So, here's some of the destruction of the San Francisco. Now, I don't know what this number means here where it says 151K, but it so the great 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire destroyed most of the city and left 250,000 people homeless. The Alaska earthquake, I brought this up because it talked about them. The Alaska earthquake of 1964 was of greater magnitude than the San Francisco earthquake. It released perhaps twice as much energy and was felt over an area of almost 500,000 square miles. So, the San Francisco earthquake, one of the most destructive, and killed nearly 700 people and left the city in ruins. All right, so let's talk about the fires that happened because we're talking about it's going to end in fire, right? The destruction of the world is going to end in fire. So 1759, well, that's 2 years in Sweden, 2 years after Emanuel Swedenborg said, what he said. The second Great Stockholm Fire starts 1759. Then we have 1760. You have one in Finland, right next door to Sweden. And then it was part of Sweden. So there you go. Then you have the Great Boston Fire, 1760. The Great Fire of Tartu. Is that part of Tartaria? Tartu. First Great Fire of New York City, 1776. Everybody knows that number, right? Because of the Declaration of Independence by the United States. Also, the starting year of the Bavarian Illuminati by Adam Weishaupt. Coincidence? 3 years after the Jesuits were exiled? I don't know. I don't think so. 76 also, the capital of Croatia destroyed in a fire of unknown origin. 1787, Great Boston Fire, 1787. There's so many Great Boston Fires that they named them after the years. First Great New Orleans Fire of 1788. There's a second Great New Orleans Fire of 1794. Again, okay, Boston, New Orleans has the same fate. Why is that? Detroit. Second Battle of Copenhagen led to the burning of over 1,000 buildings. Fire of Moscow, and you guessed it, 1812, when they were having was it was burned to deny shelter to Napoleon, right? But how did they kill 400,000 troops and survive themselves? The War of 1812 included fires in Buffalo, York, the burning of Washington, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the Great Fire in I can't read this, Bavaria, and St. John's, Newfoundland. 1820s. I mean, look at all these fires that are happening. You have all over the place. Then we go back to America in the 1830s. You have one in Fayetteville. You have the second Great Fire of New York City. You have one in South Carolina. Great Fire of Pittsburgh in 1845. Great New York City Fire of 1845. I mean, there's fires all over the place. 1850. San Francisco had one then as well. Destroyed 2,000 buildings. I mean, that is a lot of buildings, ladies and gentlemen. 2,000 buildings in 1851 when they were starting to do the gold rush, right? In 1849 is the gold rush of San Francisco, and 2 years later 2,000 buildings are destroyed in a great fire. Was there 2,000 people over there in that time? Did they make it that far? By foot, by horse, by wagon? Does everybody have a horse and wagon? I don't think so. It's very odd the way that things turn out. Great Montreal Fire of 1852 left 10,000 of the city's 57,000 residents homeless. Great Fire of Newcastle and Gateshead. I mean, there's a lot of fires here, folks. A lot of fires. Chicago Fire, 1874. Great Boston Fire, 1872. Destroyed 776 buildings this time. So many. And there was a Great Chicago Fire of 1871 and 74. So, again, a third instance of multiple great fires happening within several years of each other. All right. I mean, you can look at all of these. What were the fires? But probably cover ups, probably war as well. But I don't think it's war for the same reason we're told there was war. All right. So this leads us to the year without a summer because, of course, the sun would be blackened during the second destruction of the world. When would that have happened? The year without a summer. The year 1816 is known as the year without a summer because of severe climate abnormalities that cause average global temperatures to decrease by zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.7 degrees Celsius. That's a load of BS. After everything I've just showed you, all the war that was happening, the earthquakes that were happening just years prior to it, they want to tell you that a nuclear winter happened because of climate abnormalities. Evidence suggests that the anomaly was predominantly a volcanic winter event caused by the massive 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in April in the Dutch East Indies, known today as Indonesia. This eruption was the largest in at least 1,300 years after the hypothesized eruption causing the extreme weather events of 535 to 536 and was perhaps exasperated by the 1814 eruption of the Mayan in the Philippines. I didn't even bring up the volcanoes to show you guys and all my evidence. But again, volcanoes are what? Fire, destruction by fire. And we have 1814 and 1815 major eruptions that result in an 1816 year without a summer. And it actually, I don't know if this will have it, but it lasted several years. It wasn't just 1816 that the effects happened. Let's see. So between 1816 and 1819, major typhus epidemics occurred in parts of Europe, including Ireland, Italy, Switzerland, and Scotland, precipitated by malnourishment and famine caused by the year without a summer. More than 650,000 people died as the disease spread out of Ireland into the rest of Britain. There you have it, folks. All the same, all the things that we're told, the blacked out sun, the famine, the war, and the disease all happening at once, all between 1816 and 1819, but it actually goes back from 1812 to 1819, 1811 actually, and throw in the earthquakes. This, it's happened. It's already happened. We are those who are rising at the end of the millennial kingdom. I didn't even bring up the inventoriums, but you guys check out the inventoriums and check out the math of how 1,000 years ago you would have 2 billion living relatives at the same time, but we're told the population was only 300 million people. So even if we were all related to the same 2 billion people, there wasn't 2 billion people on Earth. So how's that happen? And of course, we know that we're not all related. Not 1,000 years ago, we're not related from then, for sure. So how does that happen? Well, check out inventoriums and check out orphan trains. Okay, so what I have here is the World's Fairs. This is all I'm really going to do in terms of cover ups, but look into inventoriums and the orphan trains. But look at when it's happening. 1791 is the first one. Then 1844, 1851, right? During all of this, all these fires, just years, only a few years after major earthquakes and fires, right? Where's this this one? I mean, just 10 years after, less than 10 years after major fires, and they built these buildings in 2 to 3 years. I mean, there's huge areas that they talk about. How could they be doing all that during all these wars and famines? Okay, maybe they weren't in the same place, you say. Well, we know that some of them were decade, just a decade prior. How could they build all that in 2 to 3 years? And for what reason would they do that to then only destroy it all? That's just something for you to ponder. Now, the Carrington event is the final thing I'm going to touch on here. Carrington event was the most intense geomagnetic storm in recorded history, occurring on the 1st and 2nd of September 1859 during a solar cycle 10. It created strong auroral displays that were reported globally and caused sparking and fire in multiple telegraph systems. The geomagnetic storm was most likely the result of a coronal mass ejection, or CMA, colliding with Earth's magnetosphere. A solar flare associated with the geomagnetic storm was observed and recorded independently by British astronomers Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson on September 1st, 1859. A geomagnetic storm of this magnitude occurring today would cause widespread electrical disruptions, blackouts, and damage due to extended outages of the electrical grid. So, what is that? What's happens in 1859? I don't know. Is that that's 102 years after Emanuel Swedenborg said that the second coming was happening. I know it's 100 years after that fire, or what was it, that fire in Sweden? Is that what I talked about? That was I forget where it's at, but 100 years later, 1859. To me, if I had to guess at what that was, what I would say is that 1859, the Carrington event, was some kind of switcheroo and something was done to this place. I don't know what, but the saints that are depicted in the Catholic religion, the gargoyles that are also depicted, I think that something happened that maybe brought the gargoyles in and sent the saints out. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know what happened, but I suggest you guys all go look into all of this and you can find out, you know, did the second destruction of the world already happen? I really think it did. All right. Well, that's going to do it, folks. I hope you all have a good night, and I will talk to you later. Bye.